Welcome to the Bioeconomic Clinic at drch.com. I am Dr. Chicks, and this is our weekly episode series.
And I'm Chicky. It's really wonderful to be here today. It is.
And today we are initiating a massive deep dive into the Week 3 Masterclass. And the title of this one is a lot, so bear with me. It's Tropic Collapse, Metabolic Restoration, Mycelial Symbiosis, Swarm Intelligence, and the Biocircular Paradigm. It really is. But I mean, if you are listening to this right now, maybe you're on your commute, clutching a coffee, just dreading those calendar notifications popping up on your phone.
Yeah, that is definitely a mouthful.
I want to address you directly, right? Because you are bleeding energy. Like you are chronically exhausted because you operate your life exactly like a machine. Huge trap. Yeah. And the entire goal of this masterclass deep dive is to diagnose this exact energy hemorrhage. We want to provide you with the actual tools to adapt, to survive, and I mean to thrive like a living ecosystem.
Which is such a trap, Exactly. And the synthesis we're diving into today, it draws from a genuinely fascinating and frankly kind of terrifying cross-section of disciplines. Right, we're looking at clinical diagnostics, evolutionary biology, Ori DeJuice's corporate survival studies, bioeconomic models of open access fisheries, and the absolute bleeding edge of artificial intelligence. It is, but it all points to this single profound,
absolutely terrifying. It's a massive landscape.
Paradigm shift about how we survive in a world that is just getting increasingly chaotic.
So let's start with that morning dread we just mentioned.
Yeah.
Because I think a vast majority of people wake up, they look at their endless to-do lists, and they just feel this deep systemic exhaustion that, double espresso just doesn't touch anymore, not a dent. And usually the internal narrative there is, I lack discipline, or I just need to push harder. I need a better morning routine or a life hack.
It doesn't even make a dent, which is what everyone tells you to do. Right.
But looking through our sources today, the fundamental argument is that this entire hustle culture mentality is actually a thermodynamic law. So what does that actually mean? Like, how can a work ethic be a violation of physics?
A complete lie. Well, to really understand why it's a lie, we have to look at what the research calls mechanical rot.
Mechanical rot sounds pleasant.
Doesn't it? It's basically the slow systemic decay of human capacity that's caused by these really rigid industrialized systems. Okay, the problem is that over the last century or so, we've modeled our modern economy, our businesses, and most tragically, our own personal productivity on this Newtonian mechanistic framework. Right, exactly. We view ourselves as these closed, time-reversible machines. The underlying assumption is that you can just,
like we're just cogs in a machine,
pour in caffeine and willpower, and out comes this limitless, uninterrupted stream of productivity.
But the physics of the universe strictly prohibit that kind of perpetual motion. And this is where the masterclass brings in Nicholas Georgsky-Rogen and his pioneering work in bioeconomics. Because from what I read, he basically took a sledgehammer to traditional economic models because they completely ignored reality.
They absolutely do. Yes, he really did. I mean, George F. Rogan's foundational argument was that you cannot divorce human economics, or human effort for that matter, from the physical reality of the biosphere. Right. Specifically, you cannot ignore the second law of thermodynamics.
Okay, let's unpack that, because I'm sure for some people their high school physics is a little bit rusty.
Fair enough. So the second law states that in any closed system, entropy, which is basically the measure of disorder or unavailable energy, it inevitably increases over time. Always. If a system works continuously without deep rest and systemic repair, it degrades its useful low-entropy energy into high-entropy waste. It's completely irreversible. Like, you cannot unscramble an egg, and you can't endlessly extract energy from a biological organism.
It always goes up. Irreversible.
Without degrading its actual structural integrity.
So let's translate this into a physical reality for the listener. The way I like to think about it is, it's like a car engine, right? Imagine you buy a brand new car and you decide you're going to run that engine perpetually in the red line. The floor, 100 miles an hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. What actually happens? Exactly. If you never pull over, if you never let the heat dissipate,
That's a great analogy. Slow breaks down.
you literally cannot cheat the physics of friction and heat. The thermal energy builds up inside the block. The oil burns off, the friction coefficient skyrockets, and eventually the metal physically warps and the engine violently seizes.
The oil burns off. Yeah, it's not a gradual slowdown. We don't no. But the biological equivalent of that engine seizing is what the literature calls cognitive clouding and the fragmentation virus. Yeah, when you try to operate your life like a machine, constantly accelerating, constantly switching contexts without deep structured periods of metabolic restoration, you burn through your biological reserves. Because
The fragmentation virus. We are closed systems.
the human brain is not a closed mechanical loop. It is an open, dynamic system nested within physical constraints. Right. Ecologists call these functional, evolutionary, and historical constraints. If you ignore those limits, the system breaks down at a literal cellular and chemical level.
And it produces waste. Just like the car engine produces exhaust and all that destructive heat, the human brain produces waste when it's pushed beyond its thermodynamic limit.
It really does. You know, in traditional economics, we only measure wealth, right? Yeah, the tasks completed, the money earned, the units shift. But the bioeconomic framework introduces this crucial concept called ILF.
Where's the positive output? ILF spelled ILTH.
Yes, ILTH. It was actually coined by John Ruskin, but heavily utilized in this space. And ILT is the exact opposite of wealth. It is the accumulation of negative value. Well, in a macroeconomy, ILF looks like nuclear waste, or, microplastics in the ocean, or thick smog. Okay, but in our microeconomy, like,
So what would that look like in the real world?
the internal human system Ilth manifests as that severe cognitive drain. It's the burnout. It's chronic anxiety. It's the complete dysregulation of your dopamine system, where suddenly nothing feels rewarding anymore. Wow. It is the toxic byproduct of refusing to pause. And when you refuse to pause, nature eventually forces you to break. That is,
Such a visceral image. Ilth isn't just, being tired. Not at all. ILT is the cognitive pollution we are actively accumulating by trying to operate as perpetual motion machines. It's that feeling of staring at a spreadsheet at 11 p.m. and realizing your brain is just chemically incapable of processing the numbers anymore. You're just generating frustration, which is literally biological waste.
precisely. Exactly. You're just spinning your wheels and creating heat.
But here's where the masterclass scales this up in a truly terrifying way. If operating like a machine mathematically guarantees biological and cognitive failure on an individual level, what happens when an entire massive organization employing thousands of people runs on this exact same flawed mechanical model?
Well, the results are mathematically staggering, and this brings us to the research of Ari de Juice.
Who was the former group planning coordinator for a Royal Dutch show? Right.
Yes, exactly. He authored a landmark text called The Living Company. His team conducted this massive, deeply researched study on corporate longevity all over the world. And the statistics they uncovered, they just challenge everything we assume about business. They found that the average life expectancy of a multinational corporation,
And we're talking Fortune 500 equivalents here, the biggest companies in the world.
yes, these massive entities, their life expectancy has plummeted to just 40 to 50 years. And if you look at all companies across the board, the average life expectancy is a mere 12 and a half years.
40 to 50 years. Why is the mortality rate so incredibly high? Like, what is killing them so fast?
It really is. Right, they look invincible. So Dehaas attributed this endemic failure to a phenomenon we can call mechanistic ossification. Yeah, basically when leadership blindly maximizes short-term profit and aggressively strips away human capital. Exactly. Essentially viewing the company merely as a machine for producing money rather than a living human community. When they do that, they destroy the entity's metabolic reserve.
Mechanistic ossification.
And this aligns with what the research terms does law, which dictates that an organization designed purely for economic efficiency is inherently brittle.
And the diagnosis the masterclass uses for this is the puddle pathology, which frankly I think is a brilliant metaphor for corporate decay.
It perfectly illustrates the dynamic, doesn't it? It does. When an organization stops learning, stops adapting, and just focuses entirely on efficiency and extraction, it becomes like a stagnant puddle of water.
It just hoards resources in a fixed, confined space.
Yes, it completely lacks flow, and the moment the external environment heats up. Exactly. Say there is a massive market shock, a sudden technological disruption, a global pandemic, an economic crisis. That puddle simply evaporates. Zero resilience.
Like a market shop, there's no resilience. It just disappears into the atmosphere. I mean, Blockbuster is a puddle. Toys R Us is a puddle. But DeJews contrasts that stagnant puddle with what he advocates for, which is the living river. Right. A river is in a state of continuous, healthy flow. It constantly adapts to the landscape. If a massive boulder falls into the middle of a river, the water doesn't stop and, declare bankruptcy. It simply routes around it. A living river is...
Yes, classic puddles. The living river. It just routes around it.
Outlasts the individual drops of water it contains. And the sources point out that there are companies that actually operate this way, prospering relics that have survived for centuries.
Yes, the study highlights some extraordinary examples, like the Sumitomo Group in Japan or the Scandinavian company Stora, right? These entities haven't just survived for a few decades, they have survived for hundreds of years. Hundreds. And they survive because they act as living work communities, not profit-extracting machines. DeJews identified 4 key traits of these living companies. Let's hear them. First, they are highly sensitive to their environment. Second, they have a strong sense of cohesion and identity. Third, they are incredibly tolerant of experimentation at the edges. Exactly. And fourth, they are highly conservative in their financing.
They let people try things. Okay, let's focus on that last point, conservative financing. Sure, because in the modern business world, conservative financing is often seen as lazy or, inefficient. You're supposed to leverage every asset, take on debt to fuel hypergrowth, run completely lean. Yeah, but in a biological context, conservative financing is essentially the corporate equivalent of biological fat. Right. It is maintaining a massive metabolic reserve.
Yeah, it's frowned upon. It's a buffer. Right.
The bear doesn't look at its fat reserves in October and say, this is highly inefficient.
I love this analogy. No, it would. You don't have to panic.
Just to be shareholders for one single quarter. Yeah. You use your fat reserves to weather the storm.
Which is the fundamental difference between mechanical thinking and biological thinking. Yeah, the mechanical manager looks at idle cash or cross-training as waste. They see it as a flaw in the machine, but the biological manager looks at it as the immune system.
Right, okay, but I have to stop and really push back on this premise for a second. Go for it. Because if this is so obvious, if treating a company like a machine and asset stripping it mathematically kills the company in 12 years, why do we keep doing it? Like, why is the puddle pathology the default setting for almost every modern business? And frankly, why is it how most of us manage our own personal time? It's true, if it guarantees death.
That is the big question.
Why is it the dominant strategy?
That is the core paradox of modern economics. To truly understand why we systematically self-destruct, we actually have to step away from corporate case studies for a minute. Okay, and we need to borrow a model from evolutionary biology and fisheries bioeconomics. Fisheries, yes. Specifically, we need to look at the Gordon-Schaefer model of open access fisheries. So,
we are completely pivoting from Fortune 500 boardrooms to the open ocean. Right? Walk me through how fishing explains corporate and personal burnout.
So, in the 1950s, researchers like H. Scott Gordon and Milner Schaefer modeled what happens to a biological resource, like a large population of fish in the ocean, when there are absolutely no regulations, no rules, no borders, and no property rights. In a purely open access fishery, anyone can sail out and take as much as they want. Exactly. And this creates the classic scenario that ecologist Garrett Hardin later popularized as
free for all.
The tragedy of the commons.
Because if I have a commercial fisherman in an unregulated ocean, my internal logic is completely driven by fear. Yes. My thought process is, if I don't catch every single fish I possibly can today, my competitor is just going to catch them tomorrow.
Right, you can't save for later.
So conservation is pointless. I have to extract it all right now.
And in economic terms, this psychology is driven by an incredibly high marginal time preference rate. Exactly. It basically means the fisherman and society by extension places vastly more value on immediate short-term consumption than on long-term sustainability. Yes, the Gordon-Schaefer model mathematically demonstrates that in this open access environment,
Yeah.
What is truly revolutionary here is that we are starting to see this biomimetic approach manifest in physical real yes, not just as a philosophical metaphor, but in hard structural engineering. The European Union's bioeconomy research points heavily toward mycelium-based composites, right, MBCs, as the absolute frontier of biomanufacturing.
Like actually building things. See you. Okay, let's slow down and really unpack MBCs. Because when I was reading this part of the masterclass, it sounded like pure science fiction. But this is happening in real laboratories right now. Yeah. Walk me through how you actually build something out of mushroom roots.
It really does. It is entirely real, and it disrupts traditional manufacturing completely. So manufacturers take what is called lignocellulosic substrate waste. It sounds complicated, but it is literally just the trash left over from agriculture. Things like sawdust, hemp shiv, flax, or wheat straw. Exactly. Things we usually burn or throw in landfills. They take this waste,
Which sounds very complicated.
sterilize it, and introduce fungal mycelium spores. Okay, then they simply allow the fungus to grow in a controlled environment. The mycelium naturally colonizes the waste. It basically eats the organic material and weaves a dense, self-reinforced biological matrix all the way through it. Yes, once it has grown to the desired shape, say a brick or a piece of packaging, it is heat-treated. The heat kills the fungus and stops the growth.
Just grows into the shape. So it won't sprout mushrooms in your house.
Right, exactly. And what you are left with is a physical material that possesses properties that conventional synthetic industrial materials can barely comprehend.
Statistics on these materials and the sources are just wild. If I am holding a piece of this mycelium composite in my hand, it's not just a neat, eco-friendly brick. No, very high. Yeah. The thermal conductivities of this stuff rival the absolute best synthetic toxic insulations on the market. They offer acoustic absorption that is 70 to 75% superior to conventional polyurethane foams. That's huge.
They are unbelievable. It's high performance. And the acoustics, right.
And because the cell walls of the fungi naturally contain compounds like catenin beta-glucans, the material is inherently chemically fire resistant without adding any toxic flame retardants.
And perhaps most importantly, for our shift toward a bioeconomic paradigm, they have a net negative global warming potential.
A net negative. Think about that.
It's amazing. Traditional manufacturing pumps immense amounts of carbon into the air. But with MBCs, the biogenic carbon sequestered inside the agricultural waste during the cultivation process actually exceeds the life cycle emissions of creating the material itself.
Cleans the atmosphere just by existing.
It really does. Furthermore, some highly optimized formulations are showing Young's moduli, which is the engineering metric for measuring mechanical stiffness and elasticity, approaching that of low-density wood products.
So let me make sure I am fully grasping this. Yeah, we are taking actual agricultural trash. We are letting a brainless fungus eat it. Yep, and the output is a fireproof, soundproof, hyper-insulating structural material that actively removes carbon from the atmosphere. That is the ultimate physical manifestation of Degus's living river. It is an integrated, symbiotic system where the specific waste of one process is the exact necessary food with the next process.
Exactly right.
There is no Ilth.
Precisely. There is zero Ilth, and it directly mirrors what we were discussing earlier regarding the necessity of biological fat in a corporate environment. How so? Well, if companies intentionally build up their internal mycelial networks, investing heavily in the relationships, the cross-training, the trust between departments, they are actively creating a massive metabolic reserve. I see. When the market inevitably crashes, a mechanical company panics. It looks at a spreadsheet, realizes revenue is down, and starts mechanically cutting off its own limbs, firing its most experienced people just to artificially save a quarterly profit margin. No, a living company relies on its deep, informal mycelial network to distribute the shock, innovate new solutions, and survive the winter intact.
But a living company doesn't do that. Okay, I completely buy into the necessity of mycelial resilience. But reading through the sources, a massive, glaring question kept bothering me. What's that? A question that challenges the entire foundation of how human beings organize themselves. Mycelium is incredible at sharing resources and surviving shocks, but mycelium doesn't have a central nervous system, right? It doesn't have a brain. There is no fungal CEO sending out memos.
It makes sense, right? It does. No, there isn't.
So when an environment changes rapidly and a novel problem appears, how does a brainless biological network actually coordinate complex action? Like how thousands of individual parts solve a problem without top-down management screaming orders at them?
That is the perfect question to ask. And it brings us to one of the most fascinating biological phenomena ever studied. If you want to know how nature solves incredibly complex logistical problems without a central boss, you have to look at slime molds.
I ready? Slime molds. I have to admit, a slime mold does not sound like an organizational guru.
It really doesn't, but specifically, a species known as Dictyostalium discoideum, which researchers affectionately refer to as Dicty. Yeah, the life cycle of Dicty is the ultimate masterclass in what evolutionary biologists and computer scientists call swarm intelligence.
Okay, I want to paint a picture of this for the listener, because the mechanism is just mind-blowing. Dicty spends the vast majority of its life as just thousands of tiny, independent, single-celled amoebas wandering aimlessly around the dark forest floor, quietly eating bacteria. They are completely solitary. There is no hierarchy. There is no connection between them. They are just tiny little individual drops of water.
It's like sci-fi, just doing their own thing.
Yeah, they don't even know the other amoebas exist.
Right, but then the environment shifts, the local bacteria supply runs out, starvation sets in across the population. It does. No, if they were a rigid mechanical system, they would just run out of fuel and die in place. But Dicty has a profound evolutionary biological response to crisis. When a single amoeba begins to starve, it secretes a very specific chemical pulse called cyclic AMP into its immediate environment.
And this is where it gets crazy. And this is where the absolute magic of decentralized intelligence happens. Exactly. When a neighboring amoeba detects that microscopic pulse of cyclic AMP, it doesn't wait for a strategic briefing from a manager. It just obeys two incredibly simple, hardwired biological rules. Rule 1. Physically move toward the highest concentration of the chemical. Rule 2. Immediately secrete your own pulse of cyclic AMP to pass the message along.
DAC. It doesn't hold a committee meeting. Yes, and those two simple rules create an amplifying positive feedback loop. A biological chemical wave literally propagates across the forest floor. Wow, tens of thousands of these completely independent cells rush toward each other, driven entirely by localized chemical feedback. And then they physically fuse together into a single, massive, multicellular organism known as a slug. They do.
They a slut.
This slug, acting as a unified entity, can then crawl away across the forest floor, seeking out light and heat to find a better environment, eventually forming a stalk and releasing spores to start the entire cycle again in a new location.
They transform from a scattered, chaotic crowd of starving individuals into a highly organized, unified, moving vehicle, entirely through decentralized bottom-up coordination. But if you want to prove how unbelievably smart this brainless system actually is at solving human-level problems, we have to talk about the Tokyo Rail Network experience, because this absolutely blew my mind.
There is no leader. This is the best part. The Tokyo Rail experiment is legendary in the study of complex systems. Researchers wanted to test the spatial optimization capabilities of the slime mold. Like, how efficient could it be at designing infrastructure, right? So, scientists took a physical topographical map of the greater Tokyo area. They placed a central node of living slime mold at the geographical location representing the center of Tokyo, okay? Then they placed oat flakes, which the slime mold absolutely loves to eat, at the exact geographical locations of all the surrounding major cities and suburban hubs on the map.
So they essentially built a scale model of the Japanese metropolis out of fungus food.
Exactly. And then they simply turned off the lights and watched. What happened? The slime mold immediately began sending out exploratory tendrils in all directions. Initially, it was a highly speculative, messy, completely redundant web. It explored everywhere, yeah. But as soon as a specific tendril found an oat flake, a city, It started pulsing nutrients back through that specific tube.
Feeling around in the dark.
The flowing nutrients chemically reinforce that successful pathway, making it thicker and stronger.
What about the ones that found nothing?
Meanwhile, the pathways that found nothing, the inefficient routes, they simply withered away and were reabsorbed by the organism to save energy. Within just a few hours, the slime mold had engineered a highly refined nutrient delivery network connecting all the cities.
And here's the absolute punchline for the listener. Go for it. When the scientists took the final shape of the slime mold's network and overlaid it onto the actual real-world map of the Tokyo rail system.
A system that, mind you, took highly educated human engineers, urban planners, politicians, and billions of dollars decades to design, debate, and optimize.
Yes, when they overlaid it, the slime mold's network was nearly identical, and in some specific, highly complex nodes, the slime mold had actually found a more efficient routing solution than the human engineers. Incredible. A brainless, single-celled fungus beat human industrial engineering at its own game in a single day.
It's incredible. It is deeply humbling, but it illustrates the absolute core of a concept called emergence. Emergence. Yeah, the concept of emergence is heavily referenced in the masterclass through the work of Alan Turing on morphogenesis and Nobel laureate physicist Philip Anderson's famous essay titled "More is Different." More? Yes. Emergence explains how simple, bottom-up local interactions like amoebas following chemical gradients
Is different.
spontaneously create highly sophisticated, incredibly complex aggregate behavior.
More is different. That is such a powerful phrase. It basically means you cannot understand the complex, intelligent whole just by dissecting the simple parts. You can't understand the wetness of water by looking at a single hydrogen atom. Exactly. You can't understand the disruptive power of a hurricane by studying a single drop of rain. The intelligence doesn't live in the parts, it lives in the connections between the parts.
I really cap. We see this emergent, decentralized problem-solving everywhere in nature, and it is vastly superior to top-down control. Think of the murmurations of starlings. You see thousands of birds swooping and diving in the sky in these massive fluid shapes, never colliding with each other. It does. But there is no lead bird choreographing the dance. Every single bird is just following a simple local rule.
Where else do we see it? It likes choreographed.
React to the speed, direction, and distance of your 7 closest neighbors. That's it. Wow. That simple rule generates breathtaking complexity. We see it in particle swarm optimization in computer science, where algorithms mimic flocking birds to solve complex mathematical problems. And crucially, we're starting to see forward-thinking human management attempt to copy this.
Right. The sources mention how a former Google program manager described their internal organizational structure as a sly mold. It really does. But it was meant as high praise. They intentionally designed the company to allow autonomous teams to act independently, explore the environment, build messy prototypes, and financially reinforce what works.
Which sounds like an insult. Rather than waiting for a CEO to dictate every product launch from the top down. Exactly. However, the expert analysis in the masterclass also points out the severe danger of trying to implement this without understanding the limits. They call it the Thunderdome effect. The Thunderdome. Yeah, if the human slime mold gets too big and the internal incentives are misaligned, the independent behaviors can create massive destructive internal friction.
Teams start fighting each other.
Teams start competing against each other for resources rather than competing against the external environment. This is why managing a complex adaptive system requires a completely different cognitive mindset.
Longer act like a mechanic turning a wrench on a machine. You have to act like a gardener. Right. A mechanic forces parts into place. A gardener doesn't build a plant. You can't assemble a tomato plant with a screwdriver. You can only create the optimal conditions, the soil, the water, the light, and allow the plant to grow on its own. Yes.
Love that distinct. No, you definitely can't. You have to find the leverage points in the system. And the masterclass uses the incredible real-world example of the Yellowstone wolves to illustrate this. In the 1990s, the entire ecosystem in Yellowstone National Park was degrading. The rivers were eroding, the trees were dying. The mechanical industrial solution would have been to hire thousands of workers to artificially shore up the riverbanks with concrete.
Or manually plant millions of trees by hand.
Exactly. But the ecologists understood emergence. The solution wasn't a direct mechanical intervention. The solution was an indirect biological intervention. They reintroduced a top predator, a small pack of wool. It's all connected.
The entire geography of the park healed. Birds and beavers returned, all because they understood the biological algorithm and tweaked a single leverage point.
That is the power of biological thinking over mechanical thinking. But if we zoom out and connect this to the bigger picture, a massive practical problem emerges, which is, if nature's localized, decentralized, emergent designs are infinitely more robust and efficient than our rigid, top-down industrial engineering, how do we actually map these biological algorithms onto our modern, hyper-fast, high-tech human economy? Right.
Because we can't all just abandon our jobs, move to the woods, and pretend to be slime mold.
We can't. We have mortgages to pay. We have supply chains to run. We have smartphones in our pockets. So how do
practically transition our modern lives into this framework? This brings us to the final and, in my opinion, most crucial section of our deep dive today. The macro and micro shift to the biocircular paradigm and the concept of cognitive hybridization.
Let's start with the macro view. The biocircular paradigm demands that on a global scale, we completely abandon the Newtonian, time-reversible economic models we discussed at the very beginning of the deep dive. Right, we have to embrace thermoeconomics. On a governmental and institutional level, this means we must establish biophysically bounded national accounting. We have to fundamentally move beyond gross domestic product or GDP as the sole measure of human success, because traditional GDP counts the destruction and extraction of natural capital as positive income, which is a lethal accounting error.
Let me translate that. Using GDP to measure a healthy society is like a homeowner ripping the copper wiring and plumbing out of their own house, selling it at a pawn shop to buy groceries, and then bragging about their massive economic growth.
That is a brutally accurate analogy.
You aren't growing, you are destroying your host environment to simulate wealth.
That is exactly what we are doing on a planetary scale. The sources heavily emphasize the urgent need to redirect global financial incentives.
Right now, we have trillions of dollars in public subsidies, artificially driving ecological degradation, subsidizing fossil fuels, massive monoculture farming, overfishing.
That capital must be aggressively reallocated toward ecosystem restoration and what is being called biomanufacturing 4.0.
Biomanufacturing 4.0. This is scaling up the exact technologies we talked about earlier, like the mycelium-based composites, moving away from petroleum-based plastics and toward materials grown from waste.
Yes, and it relies entirely on a concept called industrial symbiosis. The framework gives a brilliant practical example: integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, or IMTA. Well, in a traditional mechanical fish farm, you pack thousands of fish into a net, feed them, and their concentrated waste destroys the local ocean ecosystem. It's horrible for the environment. Exactly, but in an IMTA system, you design a biological loop.
How does that work? It generates ELF.
The waste from one farmed species, say the nitrogen-rich excrement from salmon, literally becomes the biological food source for another species placed right next to them. Like what? Like filter-feeding bivalves, mussels, or kelp. The kelp cleans the water for the salmon while feeding off the salmon's waste. You eliminate the concept of waste entirely by turning it into a resource input, closing the loop as tightly as the laws of thermodynamics will physically allow.
That is brilliant on a massive industrial scale, but I want to bring this all the way back down to the absolute micro level, okay? I want to talk to the listener right now who is sitting at their desk, overwhelmed by emails, just trying to survive the week without burning out.
No, they cannot. At the individual level, the masterclass introduces the ultimate survival strategy for the modern era: cognitive hybridization. Yes, this is defined as the strategic, highly intentional symbiosis of human biological intelligence with advanced artificial intelligence.
Cognitive hybridization. I am going to throw up a massive red flag here. I think I have to push back incredibly hard on this. We have spent the last 50 minutes talking about how acting like a machine, trying to process data endlessly, is causing our entropic collapse. Right. We need to be more biological, more like the living river, more like mycelium. Doesn't merging our daily workflow with AI just make us the very machines we are desperately trying to escape? If I start using ChatGPT to write my emails and analyze my spreadsheets,
Could you make it? That's the fear.
aren't I just adding to the mechanical noise? Are we just accelerating the mechanical rot by basically becoming cyborgs?
That is the ultimate terrifying paradox, isn't it? On the surface, it feels completely contradictory. But the masterclass framework argues the exact opposite is true. Cognitive hybridization is absolutely not about surrendering your human essence or your neural sovereignty to a machine. It is about a structural concept called bandwidth matching.
Really does. Bandwidth matching. Okay, let's debate this. Explain how outsourcing my brain to a machine makes me more biological.
It's about radically recognizing what biological systems actually evolved to do best versus what mechanical systems are built to do best. Okay, think about human cognition. Humans possess incredible meta-thinking capabilities. We have emotional flexibility, subtlety, deep inductive reasoning, and the unique ability to entertain multiple conflicting perspectives simultaneously without crashing. Yes, nuance. We are phenomenal at understanding social context,
Like having nuance.
navigating human nuance, and imagining future scenarios that have never existed. That is our biological superpower.
We are absolutely terrible at processing a billion rows of data on a spreadsheet. Terrible. We are terrible at reading 5,000 emails and remembering every single detail. That causes ill.
Precisely. AI, on the other hand, excels at exactly those mechanical tasks. AI can process enormous haystacks of complex, discrete data in milliseconds. It doesn't get tired. It can find weak statistical signals in massive noise instantly. It has zero emotional intelligence, but infinite computational endurance. So, cognitive hybridization is about becoming what Martin Reeves of the Boston Consulting Group calls a biotically enhanced organization. Or in this case, a biotically enhanced individual.
Biotically enhanced individual. Okay, walk me through a day in the life of someone who is actually practicing this bandwidth matching. How do they work differently than the person experiencing entropic collapse?
Think about the person trapped in mechanical rot. They wake up, immediately open their inbox, and spend 4 hours manually reading, sorting, and replying to 300 emails. They act as a slow, inefficient human router. By noon, their dopamine is depleted, their cognitive reserve is drained, and they have no energy left to actually think about the big picture or connect their team. They are exhausted, but they haven't actually created any deep value. Exactly.
Right. They acted like a bad calculator.
The person practicing cognitive hybridization does the opposite. They deliberately offload the rigid, mechanical, data-heavy processing to the AI.
Letting the machine be the machine.
Yes, they use AI agents to pre-sort the inbox, summarize the 50-page reports, and extract the key data points from the spreadsheet. By delegating the mechanical load to the machine, you instantly stop forcing your biological brain to act like a calculator. You violently protect your cognitive reserve. I see.
Because the AI handled the heavy lifting of data extraction, my brain is finally allowed to step back and operate exactly as it evolved to. It can breathe. It can be fluid, inductive, and highly creative. I can take the AI summary, go for a walk outside, actually move my biology, and synthesize a new creative strategy. The machine absorbs the mechanical friction, which physically prevents my entropic collapse and allows me to achieve that true living river flow in my strategic thinking and my interpersonal relationships.
Yes,
You use the machine to protect the biology.
that is exactly the paradigm shift. You don't become the machine, you build a symbiotic relationship with it, just like the fungi and the pre-roots. You exchange what you are bad at for what the other excels at.
Okay, that makes complete sense, and it is a massive shift in how we should view our daily tools. We have covered a staggering amount of ground today, from the physics of exhaustion to the intelligence of fungi. So let's recap this entire diagnostic framework so the listener has a clear map moving forward. First, we identified the root disease, the mechanical model. Trying to run our bodies, our careers, and our businesses like perpetual motion machines ignores the second law of thermodynamics. It mathematically guarantees entropic collapse, creating cognitive clouding and the toxic accumulation of ILF.
Second, we looked at the organizational symptom of this disease, the puddle pathology. When leaders blindly asset strip their companies to maximize short-term profit, treating humans as disposable gears, they completely destroy the organization's metabolic reserve. The company stops adapting, becomes a stagnant puddle, and evaporates under the first sign of environmental pressure, which is exactly why the average massive corporation only lives a pathetic 12.5 years. Third,
Right, they dry up. We diagnosed the psychological driver keeping us trapped in this cycle, the open access economy. Because we fail to build and enforce biological borders in our daily lives, the attention economy treats our brains exactly like unregulated fisheries.
they aggressively extract our cognitive reserves with an incredibly high discount rate, trawling our attention until we experience complete biological burnout.
And finally, we discuss the cure, embracing biomimicry and transitioning to the biocircular paradigm. We must actively build invisible mycelial networks of trust and resilience within our teams.
We must foster the emergent, decentralized swarm intelligence we observe in the slime mold.
And on a deeply personal level, we must engage in cognitive hybridization, intentionally using AI to absorb the mechanical, data-heavy load so our minds can remain fluid, creative, and profoundly biological.
It is an incredibly profound, entirely necessary framework for surviving the modern world.
So here is my direct call to action for you, the listener. I want you to conduct a ruthless audit of your environment today.
Look at your calendar for tomorrow. Look at how you communicate with your team.
Look at how you consume information on your phone. Are you operating like a stagnant puddle, slowly, miserably evaporating under the intense heat of the attention economy?
Or are you actively, intentionally designing your daily systems to be an adapting, resilient, living river?
The shift from mechanical to biological thinking isn't just a clever corporate metaphor. It is the fundamental biophysical requirement for survival in an increasingly complex, unpredictable world. You either adapt biologically or you break mechanically. And I want to leave you with one final, highly provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. We know that natural biological evolution, the incredibly slow trial and error process that built the resilient mycelium and the intelligent slime mold, takes
Exact.
thousands, sometimes millions of generations to rewrite physical hardware. Digital bioeconomy, driven by self-improving AI and relentless algorithmic mutation, is evolving exponentially every single day. The environment is changing at the speed of light. So if our digital environment is mutating millions of times faster than our biological hardware can naturally adapt, are we rapidly approaching an evolutionary breaking point where human cognition simply cannot keep up?
It's very slow, completely unprecedented.
Without fundamentally, perhaps technologically altering our biology. Think about that paradox. And join us next week for the identity crisis and the vestigial trap.